Hello, and welcome to 30 Minutes with the Author. I'm your host, Lori Crever. Today's program, we're talking with author Dale Mattheis about his book, EXILE to the Stars. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Lori. I'm really looking forward to it.
Good. Your book is billed as science fiction, but when I read it, it felt more like a fable to me. What is the beginning for you of the idea to write the book? Was it to do something science fiction, or did you have this legend, fable, swashbuckling tale that needed to be told?
Actually, I've been a science fiction fan ever since I was a youngster. And, that comes and goes as you grow up and go through various phases. But at one time I had a huge collection of science fiction, and there came a point in life when I thought about writing. In fact, I thought about it in college, but it got put off by a number of things that I decided, okay, it was either time to start doing it or to stop whining about it, wanting to write. And so finally I did that. I had been operating a business for some time. I just shut everything down and sort of holed up for about a year and a half and decided to write, to see if I could write. I had no idea. And it took a while. It took a long time, months, to really decide whether I wanted to do this. It was a lot of work. I had no idea it was going to be that much work. And after 2 or 3 months, though, it was clear that that is what I wanted to do, and things sort of flowed from there.
How did you get the idea for Jeff, the swashbuckler? I say swashbuckler because he's very good with a sword.
Yeah, he is. He is. I had a lot of thought about that. At that time, I wasn't quite sure how to start. I knew that some people like to outline an entire book. They'd work out all the themes, all the plot transitions, put it down on paper, and then pretty much fill in the blanks as they proceeded. I couldn't do that. I'm not that organized. I wanted to see what would happen, so I just came up with the name Jeff. I have no idea where it came from, and his best friend Carl. I had no idea. And I says, okay, what do they look like? I had to get some idea of what they looked like. Sort of created a mental picture for both Carl and for Jeff, and then took it from there, and I knew where I was going to start. That's where I was living at the time, was in the Seattle area.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. It
Yes.
starts in Seattle, and they're both young college professors?
Yeah, middle 20s, and junior instructors in a big university.
And the year is?
2025.
Okay.
And
so we get a little bit, in the beginning of what a even more degraded society has been created.
Yeah.
Some of the crime, the safety issues, the bar that they're at.
the whole thing. It's interesting. It's one of the things I learned about writing is getting the beginning segment of it right. And it was my first book, my first writing, and it was a real challenge to do this. That's what I decided to do. I took what I decided were themes today, where I thought things were going.
Yeah,
and
that's what I was going to ask you.
Okay, what's going to happen 25
right,
years
how much
down the
more
line?
over the limit can it be pushed?
Can it go that far? Would the
Yeah.
whole thing collapse? Was it going to be the way I perceived it? Well, the answer to that was no. I don't think anybody, I don't have a crystal ball anymore, anybody else does. But I just took what I thought, it might be a logical progression from the contemporary scene, and wrote that as the opening section. I originally had not. I originally had written, it was still that same scene, but it was a much milder scene. It was building the characters. And I was criticized pretty roundly for that by some agents that I had put some pages out to.
Because they thought it should be more dramatic, more like really grab the reader
Exactly.
and just even kind of
Exactly.
shock them a bit, like, which
Grab
it
their
does,
attention.
you know.
It does. It says, and the contemporary thought at that time, I think it still is that you have about 20 seconds, 15 seconds to grab somebody's attention. They pick a book up off a shelf, they open it up, what are they going to look for? You're an unknown author. Who is this guy, you know? It's great artwork, and that's going to help them pick up the book, but you've got about 15 seconds after that to capture them. So I says, okay, I can do this. And so that's what I sort of morphed it into the bar scene right at the start there. Did that.
And established that they can handle a sword. Are they in a sword club or fencing club or something like that? Because Jeff is very proficient.
In that area, in that era that I created, in that part of my world that I created, a part of the progression from contemporary society to that time was how it was an increasingly accelerated transfer of wealth from one segment of the population to the other, where degrees didn't really mean a lot at that point unless you knew the right people to get a job, since there were so many people with degrees and not that enough jobs to go around. It was a time when there were a recurrence of old themes in our society. Not exactly medieval, because it's not medieval. It's an advanced time from here. And I did that with some trepidation about the swords. If that's not done right, it can be just, oh dear, another sword fantasy, of which there are thousands out there. And so I had a lot of reservations about doing that. Yet I really loved, I've never done dueling or fencing myself, but I truly loved that. Wish I would have started doing that when I was much younger. And I says, okay, I'm just going to see if I can do it right and take it up. So in this time in the society where Jeff and Carl, where the book starts, dueling has come back in a serious nature. It's a way for young men to get their aggressions out, their anger. A lot of it's under the radar. It's not authorized, so on and so forth. And that's why they got into it at the university level, not on the aggressive or combative level. And that's where they were heading for that night, is to their fencing club at the opening section of the book.
So then a terrible earthquake happens. Is it an earthquake or a volcano? It's an earthquake.
It's an earthquake, right. Yeah, but it's both, actually.
Yeah.
The Pacific Northwest has a whole string of not so inactive volcanoes. For instance, Mount St. Helens right now is burbling along and might let go. Mount Rainier, which is a 14,000-foot rather extinct volcano, is not entirely. It still has little rumbles itself from time. So it goes all the way up into Canada. It's a whole string of volcanoes. And there is a massive earthquake, and that rips open a number of volcanoes, and from there Mount Rainier just basically blows off the top 1/3 of its peak and sets off all kinds of other volcanoes as well.
And so Jeff, he's in sort of an avalanche and loses consciousness, and...
Well, they do. Actually, Jeff had managed to get himself fired.
So he's, and he's hiking and
he's
pondering.
Trying to get it out of his system, so he goes hiking.
And it's a kind of a nutty hike, because he's just by himself, right? And he's got his little satchel of supplies.
That's right. That's what he does. He drives his friend Carl nuts, because he always does these things. Carl thinks Jeff is crazy for doing it, and he is crazy for doing it. It's early spring. There's still snow in the mountains. He goes off for himself about.
He's not crazy. He's passionate.
He is that. If nothing else, stubborn. He is.
Very stubborn.
Very stubborn. Yeah. Right. Exactly. And he does. And Carl's going to meet him up in the mountains when he can get away from his biology project. Carl's a biologist with a lot of love for chemistry and mathematics, and Jeff's a cultural anthropologist. And Jeff's hiking up there in the mountains after having lost his job, and the earthquake does strike. And he's sure he's going to die, and he should have died. He would have died had he stayed around. But the last thing he remembers basically is tumbling down the mountainside covered in an avalanche, and he blasts into a tree, and that's the last thing he remembers. And that shifts over to the next chapter at that point.
Right, where he's on, is he in a different galaxy? Well,
what I wanted to do was to see what would I do, what would any person do if you woke up in an environment having been knocked out and thought you were dead in an avalanche. I mean, what else are you going to think, right? That something like that is massive as that. You wake up, there's snow where you were knocked out, and there's snow where you wake up. And in fact, there's a blizzard when he wakes up, and he has no idea he's been transported, which is the whole idea. And it becomes clear that he's in a totally different location, and something's not the same because the terrain obviously is different. But he has no idea at all that he's been transported at that point. And he has to move or die, so he heads downslope down toward the forested land and tries to figure it out as he goes. That's what happens.
Yes. Now, one of the really interesting parts of the book I would like to talk about a little bit is Jeff's rapport with the wolves.
Right. Right.
How did you come up with the idea that he would end up having such a connection with them and ability to communicate with them? It's such an integral part of the story, and it's so well done. It's so plausible.
Thank you. Well, I don't know. I've been fascinated with wolves for a long time. They're a highly social creature, highly social, very, very highly organized. They distribute the workload around the pack from junior to senior. There is seniority in the pack. Well, there is a lot of animal species, but the wolves have it down to a science. And they're just totally fascinating creatures. And there's so much mythology about them and so much misinformation about them. I'd studied wolves for some times and gotten a good idea of what their lifestyle was like. And I thought, why not? Okay, why not? The element that for some reason I see wolves as having a sense of humor. I'm not sure where that came from, but I just couldn't help it. And Jeff and Carl kid each other a lot. They're sort of jokesters in sort of a practical joke sort of way. And the wolves take that 2 or 3 steps farther. They are carnivores. They're serious creatures. There's nothing frivolous about them, but they have their own peculiar sense of humor. And so I have them meet, and it was also an opportunity for me to have Jeff to discover that he has talents that he had no idea he had. And it's the wolves that introduce him to that. And that was a wonderful opportunity to do that. And also to play with what knowledge I had of neurology and the topography of the brain, and so I managed to put him inside of his own head, literally. And that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing that. And I know how much I hated icons on computers, and you're always looking for the icon, you can't find it. So I created one that kept running away from him, and I loved that. That was fun.
Yes, yes. So Jeff ends up finding himself back into a society where there is an old war that's being played out in very dangerous battle situation, and he's the leader. How does that come about, that this gentleman who's whisked onto a different planet finds himself in sort of this unwitting role of being the leader?
Great question. I think if you look at great leaders in history, how many of them knew they were going to be a great history from the start? How many of them? Some of them obviously had ambitions from the time they were very young. Some of them did not. They were simply thrust into it by the force of history and the events that surrounded them, and that you either pick up the gauntlet at that time or you don't. As it turns out, Jeff is not entirely a human himself, which is one of the reasons he was able to communicate with the wolves. He comes from a very long life.
He doesn't really know, right? His
that.
Genetic endowment and history and how it goes to a different planet. It's so
He does not. He doesn't know that. And he's constantly being thrown back on his heels by discovering all these things. And as he goes along, people keep dumping things on him. Well, you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to. He says, no, I don't. Get out of here. You know, you take me from my world. You dump me on the planet. You tell me I'm going to have to do it. And then you say I'm going to have to get involved in this war and try and save people. He says, get lost. He doesn't want to do it. He fights it for a long time. As he heads south, he's looking for civilization. And as a cultural anthropologist, he has a good understanding of the medieval period. And he figures that's where he'll find civilization. And as he goes, he meets first the wolves and then the villagers. And as he goes, he keeps getting all this stuff laid on him. And he still doesn't understand why that is. Yeah. So.
It's so interesting how he ends up encountering, he figures out how to make coffee.
Yeah.
And then the village that he's in, they've got something sort of like an ale.
Yeah.
You know,